What you know, Alibis. Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Good to have you here. It's Monday, June 2nd. We are supposed to have openings in the Lori Daybell case today. However, on Friday, court ended early because Lori wasn't feeling well. And as of now, I have not heard a status of whether or not she will be in court today. And jury selection still is not finished. If we were to get a jury today, I guess it's possible we could have openings later today, but it could be tomorrow. We'll see how things go, and I will update social media as I hear new information. If you want the latest, I encourage you to follow Nate Eaton and Justin Lum, both on their socials. They are there in person and can keep you updated quicker than I can. This is just a very generalized crash course to get us ready for trial. There is a lot of things in between what we're going to go through today that you just can't fit into one episode and will come out during trial. But over the years, it's easy to forget little details here and there about each individual case. And I always do a little crash course before we start a big trial. So let's jump right in. Just a refresher, Brandon was married to Lori's niece, who I call Melani, for over 10 years, and they share 4 children together. So Brandon had been around for quite a while, and Tylee and JJ grew up around Brandon. And in fact, Tylee asked Brandon to baptize her when she was 8 years old. Brandon said that he and Charles bonded over business, and Lori was always a mother figure to Melani, so it was easy for all of them to hang out. When Brandon testified at Lori's trial in Idaho, he said that when he and Melani were first married in 2008, religion wasn't very important to her, and she really didn't like going to church. He was the one pushing for her to go. But by the fall of 2018, Melani starts to spend more time with Lori. Now, remember, in the fall of 2018 is when Lori was attending the Preparing a People conferences. This is the time frame when she met Chad Daybell. She was hanging out with Melanie Gibb and Zulema. And Melani was going to these fireside chats that weren't sponsored by the church. And it was clear to Brandon he was not welcome to attend those with her. Melani started going to the temple daily. She wanted to buy $10,000 worth of food storage, which seemed like a lot to Brandon. And going into 2019, Brandon said things got even more bizarre. He started getting texts from Charles that Lori was accusing him of cheating. Melani told Brandon she had a revelation from God that he was gay, and she didn't feel safe with him in the home. And things really just went downhill after the start of 2019. Brandon did talk to Charles about his frustrations with his marriage to Melani, and he said that was the topic of the last conversation he ever had with Charles. He was blindsided by Melani, where she told Brandon that she wanted to separate. And also, before we jump into this timeline, just a reminder, in the light dark scale that Chad emailed to Lori very early on, Brandon was listed as a 3 dark spirit. On July 8th of 2019, Brandon and Melani begin their divorce proceedings. Now, Brandon had been talking with Charles off and on, and Charles warned him that Melani was spending a lot of time with Lori. Melani was the sole beneficiary of Brandon's life insurance policy. July 11th, 2019, Charles is murdered there in Chandler. July 13th, Lori sends a text to Chad and asked him to clear Melani's house of bad spirits. Chad said he was working on it, but he had to break down the bad spirits that Brandon had created. This same day is when Brandon moved his personal belongings out of the marital home. July 18th, 2019, Lori texted Chad when she learned Charles had changed his beneficiary to Kay Woodcock. Lori ends that text with, "I love you. This is terrible, but it's probably another step in bringing down the Gadiantons, especially Brandon." Just a little timeline here for some perspective. We know on September 8th, Tylee is last seen in photos at Yellowstone National Park, and the next day she was buried on Chad's property. September 17th, Melani texts Brandon and asks for his new address. And we know on September 22nd, 2019 was the last day JJ Vallow was seen alive, and the next day he was buried on Chad's property. September 23rd, Brandon's new lease begins. In the Gilbert file on Brandon's case, they note that between September 25th and September 30th, 2019, Alex, Lori, and Chad prepare for Brandon's murder. On September 25th, 2019, Alex was confirmed to be in possession of Charles's Jeep because he took the Jeep to a window tinting shop. He had the front windows tinted 20% and the rear windows 5%. That percentage level relates to the amount of light that passes through that window tinting. He's also at Chad's house from 10:05 to 10:23 a.m. this day. Phone pings have Alex inside the residence, but not out in the yard. Alex also buys a burner phone on this day. And still on September 25th, this is the day Brandon moves in at his new home. September 26th, Melani flies from Mesa, Arizona to Idaho Falls. She stays there until the 29th. Also, on September 26th, Alex activates a burner phone there in Rexburg. He goes to the gun range between 4:54 and 6:58 p.m., and he uses the alias C. Quint when signing in. September 27th, Alex goes back to the gun range and stays between 3:54 to 6:45 p.m. And on September 28th, he goes back to the gun range and stays for around 2.5 hours. September 29th, this is the day Melani flew back to Mesa from Idaho Falls. Alex's car was near the Idaho Falls airport around 3:05 p.m. Her plane departed at 4:10. On September 30th, between 11:31 a.m. and 1:16 p.m., Alex's cell phone was at Lori's apartment. While at Lori's, he got a call from Chad's burner phone at 12:34 p.m. Between 1:17 and 4:32 p.m., Alex is back in his own apartment. The same day, Lori searched for how to get the back seat out of my Jeep Wrangler, JK rear seat removal, and she also searches on YouTube for how to do it yourself rear seat removal. At 6:01 p.m., Alex goes back to Lori's apartment. That phone stays in Lori's apartment until October 3rd. Which is the day Alex returns back from the attempt on Brandon. September 30th at 8:10 p.m., the Jeep was seen driving on Interstate 15 near Blackfoot, Idaho. That is south of Rexburg. And this was 37 hours prior to the attempt on Brandon. Google Maps puts this drive at around 870 miles or 13 hours and 5 minutes if you drive straight. October 1st, Brandon and Melani close on the sale of the marital home. Around 6:52 a.m., the Jeep was westbound on I-40 near Holbrook, Arizona. That's about 3 hours from Gilbert. Investigators note the image shows Alex driving towards the Phoenix metro area, and the back wheel was missing. This is around 26 hours before the attempt on Brandon. Sometime in this time frame, Alex searches for Brandon's home address. At 9:19 a.m., Alex calls Chad. At 11:55 a.m., Alex gets a call from Chad. Alex, at this point, was just northeast of the Phoenix metro area, and we are 21 hours before the attempted murder. On the same day, Lori retains that storage unit where the spare tire and back seat would be stored and eventually brought back out when Alex returns. And later on, this is where all of the kids' personal belongings would be found after the search for the kids began. Between 7:31 p.m. and 7:48, Chad and Alex have a phone conversation. 7:52 p.m., Alex does a search for Brandon's home. October 2nd, this is the day of the attempted murder on Brandon. Between 7:17 a.m. and 7:18, Alex searched for directions to Brandon's house from his current location. At this point, his current location was near the LDS Temple in Gilbert, Arizona, which is around 2 miles west of Brandon's home. 7:19, Alex drives to Brandon's address. 7:25, Brandon leaves with all 4 of his children in the car. He takes the oldest 2 to school, the third to a day camp, and then the baby was dropped off with Melani. After he dropped the baby off, Brandon goes to the gym. At 8:02 a.m., Alex's phone, which is kept in Lori's apartment, sends a text to Lori's cell phone, and then there was a phone call that lasted around 23 minutes. Also, during this time frame, Alex and Chad's burner phones both communicate with each other multiple times. Brandon returns home around 9:14 a.m. after leaving the gym. As he rounded the corner, he sees a Jeep parked close to a van that was parked on the street. The Jeep had a Texas license plate, and he saw there was no back tire on the rear of the Jeep. By the way, in the description, I'm going to link a video I did with my Jeep showing why this tire had to be removed in order for Alex to lift up that window a little bit to get the muzzle out. If that tire had been on the back, he would not have been able to open that rear window. Brandon saw the back window open up and saw the muzzle of the gun pointed towards his car, and then he heard a pop. He later testified he knew he saw a silencer because he was looking right at it. Now, after he heard that pop, he drove away and called 911. He ended up parking next to a public pool, but he saw the Jeep come around the corner and tried to follow it. But the dispatcher told Brandon to park in front of his house, and then police arrived shortly after. Brandon said that there were no more than 5 people who knew where he was living. His neighbors who helped him move in, and Melani being one of them, and he was required to tell her. After the shooting between 9:19 a.m. and 9:25, Alex travels away from Brandon's house going south. During this time frame, he also made 2 phone calls to Chad. By 1:22 p.m., Alex is traveling north through the Apache Reservation. He gets a phone call from Chad. At this point, he's about 3 hours or so away from Brandon's. At 2:25 p.m., Lori and Chad are seen on surveillance at that storage unit. They brought in that rear spare tire and also the back seat from the Jeep, and they stored it. She had rented this unit 24 hours prior to this. At 7:53 and 8:12 p.m., Alex and Chad communicate as Alex is driving into Utah. At 8:42 p.m., Alex and Chad talk for the last time. At this point, Alex was near Green River, Utah. Between 8:46 and 8:53 p.m., Lori searched for Gilbert, Arizona news, man shot in Gilbert, Arizona, man shot in Gilbert, Arizona, October 2nd, 2019, ABC News, Brandon Boudreaux. Chad also made a Google search for Gilbert, Arizona news at some point. However, we don't know the time of that search. What also happened on this day that was significant? Lori bought the malachite rings for her and Chad that they would eventually use when they were married. This was purchased on Charles's Amazon account, and it was shipped to the townhomes in Rexburg. The ring she purchased on this day was an 11 and a half. 2 days later, she exchanged that for a half size smaller to 11. Then on October 25th, that ring was exchanged a last time for a size 10. So let's go through the police report about specifics regarding the attempt. The bullet hit the door jamb of Brandon's car just above the window. There was a hole there about the size of a dime. There was no exit hole on the inside. They did find 4 bullet fragments under the doors and the weather stripping. Investigators believe the actual bullet fell off as Brandon was driving away, and that was never found. But the trajectory matched Brandon's description of where the Jeep was parked. Brandon had a Tesla with doors I just refer to them as like the DeLorean in Back to the Future. So when he pulled into his driveway and puts the car in park, those doors automatically open and lift. And at that point, the driver's side glass window fell to the ground. When officers were there, he told them that he was divorcing Melani and also informed them about the shooting of Charles. October 3rd at 4:28 a.m., the Jeep was driving northbound on U.S. Highway 20, which is close to Rexburg, Idaho. The same day at 10:30 a.m., Melani was interviewed by investigators. She agreed to meet but didn't ask why they wanted to talk to her. She did bring their youngest child to the interview. Melani told investigators that her and Brandon were in the final stages of divorce. She was not employed, but was receiving money from the divorce. When asked why they were divorcing, Melani said Brandon traveled a lot and was starting to make bad business decisions. She said she allowed him to make the financial decisions because she was a full-time mom to their 4 kids. She said she also noticed a change in Brandon's behavior. She thought it could be stress from work, but also couldn't be sure. She said she also found a lot of gay activity surrounding Brandon. She found a video of him dancing that was on his phone and gay pictures, but she didn't elaborate. The investigator asked if Brandon had a history of that, and she said no. And she also thought he would become defensive if she asked about it. She suspected he used illegal drugs, and she believed he was using ecstasy because it was a gay drug. She had no evidence to back up any of these claims. She also said Brandon wore sunglasses a lot. He acted more confidently and had recently lost weight. When asked about finances, Melani said Brandon made decent money since they had been together. He had owned several different companies over the years and shares responsibilities with business partners and friends. Melani was paid out by one of their business partners as a result of the divorce. She also received a payout from an insurance company that Brandon previously owned. He was paying her child support monthly, and she said she was not worried about money even though she did not have a job. She confirmed she was still on his life insurance policy, and she was supposed to obtain a policy on herself with Brandon as the beneficiary, but as of then had not done so. When asked about her day on the attempted murder, she said Brandon dropped off one of their children. She couldn't remember what they did after he dropped the child off, but she says sometimes they go to the park, to the gym, sometimes the mall, but she couldn't remember what her and the child did yesterday. She does remember ordering groceries online. She said she made dinner and then went to bed. When asked if she communicated with anyone, Melani said she had received multiple calls from Brandon, which wasn't normal. Brandon texted that he wanted to check in on the kids and said he had a bad day. Melani did not reply until the next morning on the 3rd and told him the kids were okay and she hoped he had a better day. Otherwise, she couldn't remember if she talked to anybody else. When she was told someone tried to shoot Brandon the day before, the investigator noted she had no change of expression and stayed quiet. The investigator asked if she knew of anyone who would want to hurt or kill Brandon, and she said Brandon had a lot of friends and spent time with people she didn't know. She said he had a history of doing business with Charles, and she told the investigator about an open investigation by the Chandler PD involving Charles and her Aunt Lori. She said Charles went to the house and threatened her uncle Alex with a baseball bat. She also said Charles tried to hit Tylee, and as a result, Alex pulled a gun and shot and killed Charles. She told the investigator it was justified as self-defense. Brandon tried to tell her it was murder and not self-defense, but Melani thought Brandon was trying to put a wedge between her, Alex, and Lori. She says Charles and Brandon used to communicate on a regular basis. Melani tried to tell Brandon not to talk to Charles because he had cheated on Lori. Melani said Lori was somebody she could trust, and also she was very close to her. She provided identification information for Alex, Lori, and Tylee. She said she was not sure if they lived together, and she denied knowing the specific location for Lori and Alex. She said she last saw them 2 weeks prior before Lori moved. She said Tylee was, quote, in college or something, end quote, but did not know where. Lori had her autistic son with her and was unsure which school she wanted him to go to. The investigator asked for any address or contact information that would be helpful in reaching them, and Melani would not give that type of information because she was told people could track phones and use listening devices to gather information. Melani said Lori had to do her own thing while Melani was figuring out her divorce with Brandon. At the end of the interview, she did ask if Brandon was okay, and she was told he was alive. At that point, the investigator said Melani didn't have any further information for him, and the interview ended. So we are on October 3rd, the day after the attempt still. Between 2:11 and 2:14, Alex and Lori are seen on surveillance at Self Storage Plus. Alex and Lori removed the tire and a back seat from the storage unit. By 2:20 p.m., Alex is back in his apartment. 1 week later to the day after the attempt on Brandon, Alex would try to shoot Tammy Daybell in her driveway but was unsuccessful. Unfortunately, 10 days later, she was killed on October 19th. At Lori's trial, FBI agent Doug Hart testified about a text exchange on October 14th between Lori and Melani. This is 11 days after the attempt on Brandon. He said the phrase, "could he go," stood out to him as far as this text exchange because it was similar to other conversations. Lori to Melanice, "Yeah, but until that agreement is signed by the judge, it's all subject to change. That's probably the reason for the delay." Melanice, "Is there a possibility he could go before I move?" Lori, "There's always that possibility. We will work on it. Just have faith and do whatever the Lord tells you. He's always right." Melanice, "I don't recall the words to get him out, but should we try?" Lori, "I know them. I'll work on it now. Put all your energy in." Melanice, "I've worked on them all day and evening." Lori, "Me too. He's got to be ready to go." Melanice, "I know." The same day, Melanice tells Brandon she is moving to Boise, Idaho with or without their 4 children. Part of their text exchange read, "The kids could remain with you in Arizona. You would have to arrange for daycare, and I could have the kids for school holidays and summers. Or I could take the kids to Idaho and enroll them in school there, and you could have the kids for school holidays and summers. Please let me know what you'd like to do." Brandon responds, "Seriously?" Melanice, "Yes." Brandon, "Why? How is this good for our kids? I don't understand." "I will keep them in Arizona and figure it out. But why? These kids are going to need us both. They need things to stay the same and to have structure." "When are you moving?" She doesn't respond for a bit, so he says, "Is that it? No more information? This is pretty important. Can you give me more details if you're planning on moving? You should have them, right?" Melanice, "I'm planning to go next week." Brandon, "What day? Are you still planning on having the kids this week and weekend?" And then it cuts off there, so we don't know how that conversation ended, or at least I haven't found it. Brandon said he was taken aback because Melanice had never talked about Boise and, in his mind, wouldn't want to be separated from her kids. She also had a rental agreement up until July of 2020 there in Gilbert. He said this was extremely unusual behavior, especially after the shooting attempt. At this point, Brandon thought he had custody of their children and said he would seek legal counsel. But the next day, Brandon learned he and Melanice were actually still married, meaning she would have 50-50 custody and would be able to take the kids anywhere she wanted. He told investigators he was not going to exchange custody of the children the next day. October 15th, investigators are searching for the Jeep. They went to Tylee's school in Arizona only to learn she had disenrolled in August of 2019. October 16th, Brandon tells investigators Melanice was still on his financial accounts. He said she had agreed to remove herself back on October 7th. But since she hadn't, Brandon transferred funds out to another account. The same day, Melanice calls investigators and says she tried to get her kids out of school early, but learned Brandon didn't bring the kids to school at all. The investigator kind of played dumb about what Brandon had told him the day before and asked about her move to Idaho. Melanie said she wanted a fresh start, and she also thought Brandon was trying to disrupt her relationship with Lori. But when asked how, she couldn't give any examples of threats or manipulation by Brandon. October 22nd, Brandon and Melanice's divorce is finalized. Also on this day, Brandon reaches out to the Gilbert Police Department after finding Tammy Daybell's obituary while Googling Chad Daybell's name. Brandon also notified Kay Woodcock of this. October 28th, Melanice signs the lease on the Rexburg townhouse. And that same day, Brandon calls investigators to let them know he will be going to his parents' home in Utah for the foreseeable future with all 4 of his children. October 31st, Rich Robertson, who is a private investigator that was hired by Brandon to try and find Alex, Melanice, and the Jeep, sees Alex and Melanice moving items into a U-Haul as well as putting children's items on the road. These were mattresses, storage drawers, and toys, as well as tables and a sign that said free. November 1st, Rexburg police began surveillance on Lori and Chad and followed them to various locations. And Lieutenant Hermosillo begins surveillance at the request of the Gilbert Police Department. The same day, Melanice shows up at the house of a couple where Brandon briefly stayed with his kids after he was shot at. Melanice told the woman the Holy Spirit told her that the children were there and she was there to get them. Melanice was told by the woman, "Your kids aren't here," and even invited Melanice into the house. Melanice told the woman Brandon was into dark things. Eventually, Melanice left the home, but sat in the car for around 20 minutes. So the lady decides to approach the car. The woman said that Alex was in the driver's seat, but never acknowledged her. She said she had never seen Melanice act this way, and it was very concerning. Alex and Melanice drove away, but they returned and parked a few houses away. Melanice gets out of the car and stares at the residence for several minutes before getting in the car and leaving. They return again and stay parked for a period of time before driving away. The same day, November 1st, that private investigator, Rich Robertson, he is following Melanice and Alex on their drive to Rexburg. November 2nd, Melanice makes a Facebook post accusing Brandon of kidnapping the kids and offers a $10,000 reward for information leading to the location of her children. November 4th, Lieutenant Ray Hermosillo locates the Jeep in the parking lot of the townhomes in Rexburg. It's towed away from the scene, and investigators note nobody called to ask about the Jeep during or after it was impounded. November 5th, Brandon tells investigators that Melanice has moved to Rexburg, Idaho. November 12th, Brandon informs investigators he learned Melanice was still paying on his life insurance policy and it was still active, in spite of his request to ask her that she remove herself. The same day, Melanice shows up to Brandon's parents' house and asks for her kids. Now, police were called, but Melanice left before they arrived. November 14th, Melanice returns to Brandon's parents' house looking for her kids. It is chaotic and the police are called. Now, I have the video of this interaction with Melanice in the front yard of Brandon's parents' house. I'm going to link that in the description if you want to watch. At first, Melanice was cited for criminal trespass and just told to leave, but she didn't. And so she was arrested for criminal trespass enhanced by domestic violence. Alex later bails her out to the tune of $1,950. November 18th, investigators and crime scene technicians from the Gilbert Police Department fly to Rexburg to process the Jeep. They wanted to get that infotainment center that would hold GPS locations. Once there, they met with Lieutenant Hermosillo and other officers and asked if during their surveillance did they see children. Lieutenant Hermosillo said he had not. November 19th, Melanice and Brandon's divorce is finalized, and around this time, she meets her current husband, Ian Pulowski, on a dating app. Not long after, Melanice goes to his sister's house in Arizona for Thanksgiving. November 26th is the date of the welfare check. On November 30th, Melanice marries her new boyfriend, Ian, in Las Vegas. They were in Vegas with Alex and Zulema, who also got married there. Now, biological evidence from the Jeep confirmed Alex's DNA was in the vehicle, and there was a positive gunshot residue test around the back window, indicating the shot from the rear of the window as Brandon described. When Brandon met with investigators, he remembered that Charles had bought a green Jeep for Tylee, and it had Texas license plates. Now, Brandon had the Jeep's vehicle identification number because Charles had asked him to get quotes for car insurance for his cars. And that's pretty much the crash course for the attempted murder on Brandon. We're going to learn more things, I think, that are new during this trial as we have with the previous ones. But I just wanted to refresh everybody on the basics before we dive into this last trial for Lori Daybell. And just to point out what a good guy Brandon is. When JJ needed to be identified, Brandon, who was newly married at the time, drove through the night to identify JJ so that Larry wouldn't have to. Lori was indicted in May of 2023 for the attempted murder of Brandon Boudreaux as well as Charles Vallow. And to this day, she is the only one who has been charged in both. As you guys know, she is acting as her own attorney for this trial as well. So I'll be live streaming every day. So come watch. Again, we don't know when openings are going to begin. Keep an eye out on socials for whenever any news drops. I may do a YouTube short just to update quickly on what we know. Hope you guys have a good rest of your afternoon, and we will see you soon.